All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, Tom Salemi here. Welcome back. This is the DeviceTalks weekly podcast. We're going to talk today with Holly Logue. She is general counsel at a very cool company called Drawbridge. They're coming up with a new type of blood test. We're going to talk to Holly about her path to medtech and also about her role at Drawbridge. She'll actually be a speaker at this Tuesday's DeviceTalks Tuesdays, where we'll be talking with a panel of experts about protecting yourself in this age of disruption. So go to DeviceTalks.com for more about that conversation, but I know you'll enjoy meeting Holly. She has had an interesting trip into our sector. A little later, I'll speak with Daveen Chopra of Edwards. Daveen's going to talk to me about their recent approval of the Konekt Resilia aortic valve conduit. It's an interesting device that will actually save surgeons a great deal of time at a time when time is essential. So it's an important approval for Edwards, important approval for patients. Daveen and I will talk about that, but also about sort of the future of innovation in surgery. We talk a lot about minimally invasive surgery, but we're going to talk a bit about more open surgery, more traditional surgery. So Daveen's a very interesting guy, and I know you'll enjoy that conversation. But before we get into both, I'm really excited to bring you this segment with Chris Newmarker, the executive editor of Life Sciences at MassDevice. Chris and I are going to cover some of the hottest stories of this week. So let's get right into it. All right, now we're here from my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, executive editor of Life Sciences here at MassDevice. I hope we have the new logo up, but I don't know if you've noticed that this podcast will now be powered by MassDevice. How does that make you feel? Very powerful?
I got the power. Yeah, like just totally powerful, man. It's great.
You produce great audio, sir. Thank you very much for that.
Do I get a ring of power if I'm powering the podcast? Like,
Yes, but I will have the one that rules them all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very careful.
So you enrolled a new feature on MassDevice this week. It's something I like to think was inspired by our podcast last week, but I know you come up with so many great ideas on your own. But it's a kind of a top 5 list of the most read articles on your MassDevice site in the week. So
yeah, there we go. Kind of like it in case you missed it. MassDevice top 5. So really just kind of looking at our Google Analytics and saying, hey, what were the most read stories that we can give people a good rundown of what's going on here.
Awesome. So we have the numbers to support our countdown, which will begin right now. Chris, what came in at number 5 this week on MassDevice?
Well, number 5, actually, this is just hot off the presses. I guess we don't have presses anymore. Hot off the wire. We have just yesterday evening, Edwards Lifesciences released its Q2 results. And it's interesting because their CEO and other officials have been, saying that the Q2 results were going to be tough. We're in the middle of a pandemic and a recession, but kind of the nice thing was that wasn't as tough as Wall Street was expecting, and Edwards is even upping its earnings guidance for the year. And I kind of their CEO kind of summed it up that it's just basically that there's kind of like a growing recognition. People need valve therapy, can't postpone it. So they're predicting they're going to get their procedures back maybe sooner than expected.
No, that would be welcome. And we talked about Edwards last week about their approval of their Konekt Resilia aortic valve conduit. So Edwards is making some great news. Number 4, Chris. Number 4 is perennial winner. Tell us about number 4.
Yeah, the trial of Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes. It's likely not going to happen this year. It's the judge in California is suggesting that it'll probably have to be a 2021 deal, which hopefully next year we'll have a vaccine, knock on wood, and the pandemic will be less of a story. Hopefully our economy will be recovering, and that this can kind of be a big big news to follow next year is this big trial. I mean, it's probably early in the century, but I mean, I guess we can't call it MedTech's trial of the century, but it's a pretty wild trial. Remember the good old days when, the top news used to be, just like some big crazy trial that, people were following.
Oh yeah, no, this was going to be a biggie, and maybe this is more fodder for John Carreyrou to write a sequel to the Most Excellent Bad Blood, so we can have Bad Trial coming up.
Should trademark it before Carreyrou does.
Okay, so we're going to get into number 3 and number 2 after this first interview. I had a chance to speak with Holly Logue. She is general counsel at a very cool company called Drawbridge Health that's looking to disrupt the blood collection industry. And she's actually going to be a panelist on our DeviceTalks Tuesdays, which is coming up. And it's all about finding a ways to, number one, disrupt medtech, make sure your technology is in position to disrupt medtech. We've got a great panel of general counsels and attorneys. The attorneys are coming from Finnegan. We have attorneys from Drawbridge Health and Hologic. You can check out all the details on devicetalks.com. It's going to be a really important conversation. Let's take a moment. We're going to hear from Holly Logue of Drawbridge Health. Well, Holly Logue, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm blessed to have guests with very interesting backgrounds, and you among them. You've got some time you've spent at law firms and at startups, and I'd love to learn how you sort of transition from one to the other and sort of move back and forth. But one thing that stood on your LinkedIn profile was your stint with a committee in Congress. What was who did you work with, and how did you end up spending some time there?
So it was interesting. I was a big fan of Obama, and I was at Arnold and Porter when he got sworn in, and I said to everyone I worked with, I said, I want to do something. I want to do something for this country. This is a great administration, and I thought I'm going to go work for Congress. And everyone told me, you have to know someone, and someone has to pull some strings for you to get in there. And I said, well, I'm still going to send out my resume, and I did. And I got a call from the Committee of Science and Technology in the House of Representatives. And it just so happened they were looking to expand their jurisdiction into biotech. Oh. And they oversee the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And at that time, there was a big push from Waxman to do a bioequivalence program to get biosimilars on the market faster. And so Congress had made the decision to push this. They'd gone to the FDA saying, please make an accelerated regulatory pathway. The FDA went to NIST and said, we don't really know how to do this with these large molecules. Can you help us? And that lit a fire under NIST, who decided they were going to develop an entire biomedical research program. And then, of course, the committee needed someone with my background who could understand what was going on.
Very cool. So did you carry away some lessons from that experience that you still lean on today?
Yeah, working for Congress is very painful. No, it's interesting because I did expand it. I set up a lot of hearings for the committee, and then I started working on a couple of legislative pieces. And what I took away is how important relationships are, and how much, if you can foster those relationships on the Hill, you can get done as a company. And so that has actually come full circle at Drawbridge when COVID came out. And so this is a great opportunity. The federal government is now going to pay attention to this. There will be some changes that we see in the FDA and other areas, other agencies. We should really get involved and see what we can do. And so we've hired a government relations firm, and I'm in charge of basically managing how we work through that government relations firm to build some credential within the federal government and find some opportunities that way.
So last question about Congress. Is this something we're having an election coming up? There's going to be a lot of passion and energy tied to the outcome. I'll just leave it at that. Younger professionals listen to this podcast. Is that an experience you'd recommend for someone?
If you really believe in what the administration is doing, and then I think it is a good experience. it can be painful. It can be challenging. I also know people who've gone up there and become lobbyists. And I think there's an incredible amount of life experience and education that can come out of that experience. And that was certainly the case for me. I won't guarantee that it will necessarily meet your expectations or be anywhere near what you think it will be, because it wasn't. It was a shock to me to see how our government really worked. And the level of dysfunctionality to some extent.
So you were an attorney. You were an associate at Arnold and Porter before that, and then you went on to join the life sciences industry. Was that always your plan, or did that just make itself available?
And I've had plans, and they've never worked. So.
Amen.
Yes.
No plan is the best plan in my mind, but.
So I actually never even planned to be a lawyer. I was planning to be a doctor, and something happened, and I got a little cynical, and I said, well, I'm just going to take the LSAT and see what happens. And I scored really, really well on the LSAT, and I said, well, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. And it all kind of fell into place after that. But there was, never my plan. I wish I could say I did. I wish I could say it was more calculated than that. And I've tried to be. I really have. But life is incredibly unpredictable. And what I have found is if I just look a little bit ahead instead and think, well, what skills do I want to have? What experiences are going to enrich me as a professional and individual? What I have found is all of that ends up allowing me to do a whole bunch of different things. So as I mentioned earlier to you before we got on this, is I am a mutt. I am not the purebred dog that you go buy at the store that has, limited, I want to say genetic code, I guess. I'm kind of the thing that got thrown together with a broad experience across many different areas. The consistency has, to my delight, been in healthcare. As I said, I wanted to be a doctor. I think that can be incredibly emotionally challenging. We're seeing it with our healthcare providers now. I don't think we appreciate our healthcare providers as much as we should. We certainly don't recognize and protect and pay them what they should be worth. But as a lawyer, what I've been able to do is, if I just do my job every day, at some point, some patient may benefit from something I've done. And that's the hope that keeps me going. I don't have to practice in an area of law that just drains my soul. And that would be the worst of all worlds. I get to have a little bit of hope in my day.
How did you find your way to Drawbridge? And let's back up and tell us a little bit about Drawbridge Health. It's really a company with an interesting device that I think my 10-year-old son would love because he hates the needles.
Yeah, well, Drawbridge is really interesting. It was actually started out of an effort from GE to commercialize or develop some IP that it wasn't using. And GE had developed all of this really cool stabilization technology for dry blood. And they didn't know what to do with it. So they spun it out into a company. And then they designed a device around that IP that was exclusively licensed to the company that was fairly simple and straightforward to use to collect blood. And that was the inception of it. And there's challenges with that, and there's certainly a benefit. I think the really interesting thing is healthcare has to change. We have to make it more patient-centric. We have to bring it to the patient. We've seen more and more things push out to the patient, especially with COVID. Thank goodness for telemedicine happening a couple of years ago. And we've seen the resistance to that from the regulatory side. So Drawbridge really has found a niche where we can help push that care out to patients. But of course, the same challenges are on the regulatory and the current infrastructure. So all of your automation, all of your standardization is set up around liquid venous blood. And all of your major machines and your reagents and everything's calculated to that. And the FDA knows how to work with that. there are transitions that you have to do and conversions between liquid blood and dry blood and venous blood and capillary blood. And so that makes it very unstandard to do what's right for the patient. Mm-hmm. And so in order to change that right now, if you think about technology curves, they're S curves, and you build up an ecosystem around something and all of a sudden a technology takes off. So when you think about the simplest example I can give is Kodak went out of business really when the iPhone came out. There was this slow transition towards digital photography, but there wasn't really an ecosystem there to make it widely available until Apple put a camera on their iPhone, and boom, no one would have seen that coming, certainly not Kodak. Now it's on who's printing their photos. And that's kind of the same thing that I see with Drawbridge, is we have this whole ecosystem set around venous blood and liquid blood, and slowly we're seeing the technology move towards a different format that's more user-friendly and towards a patient. And at some point, something's going to come in and force that ecosystem to shift. And when that happens, then all the standardization and automation will have to shift with it.
I do want to talk about the OneDraw for a moment. In looking at the video, and we'll post the link to the website on the podcast page, but it's drawbridgehealth.com. And the OneDraw looks like a computer mouse, or about the size of that you put your arm, grabs hold of your skin a little bit of yourself for a vacuum, and then draws the blood, I assume relatively painlessly. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah. I mean, that in itself, I think, is a great tech. But with the unfortunate onset of COVID, that seems to have a myriad of applications that we can use going forward. I mean, in terms of testing for disease or antibodies or whatnot. What has the last 3 months been like for Drawbridge, sort of with all of this opportunity sort of opening wide?
So I remember San Francisco went into lockdown on or around March, I think 11th, and I have never been so busy in my life. I used to joke, I thought, great, if we all get locked down, and this is back in January or February, where we weren't quite sure what we were preparing
I'll get
for.
Some books, I'll do some baking.
Exactly. Like, I'll get some sleep. I won't have to commute to the office. This is going to be great. No, that didn't happen at all. It was calls starting at 7 a.m. and going until 10 p.m. and just kind of nonstop. And what changed for us is this really terrible thing. And I don't like to make light of COVID. I have parents and I can't visit them right now. And this is killing people. This is incredibly scary and frustrating. But we can approach it from a very negative point of view or a very positive one. And again, I like to get up and go, what can I do on the positive of this? And here's an opportunity where we had something, and if we worked really hard and moved fast, we could grab onto this and push this out into the market. And one of the unique things about Drawbridge is it does use a dry blood spot format. So if you think about, some of the other similar technologies out there, they may have a device that looks like ours or doesn't use venous blood draw, instead use capillary blood, but it's liquid format. And that is not stable. Necessarily, unless you put it into cold chain transport. So you're still going into a lab, you're still going into a center. At some point, what we'd ultimately like to see, and we have to obviously work with the FDA to get there, is the ability to have this be used by a layperson in the home so that your significant other could potentially administer this device to you in your house and you don't have to leave your house. Until we get there, then there may be other alternatives around that, but anything is certainly better than sending an elderly patient into a LabCorp Quest spot or a hospital to go get a venous blood draw right now.
So what has kept you so busy? What is Drawbridge doing today and has done over the last 3 months since March 11th? How have you been spending your time?
At a real high level, we've been working with partners to validate the technology in the antibody space, and to really prove that what we have works for detection of antibodies, as well as make sure that we do the testing to support an application to the FDA and understand a lot of different angles that you may not see with just one or the other.
Excellent. Well, this has been a great conversation. I look forward to speaking with you on Tuesday on Device Talks Tuesdays, and thanks for joining us in the podcast.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm back with Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences here at MassDevice. We're doing the MassDevice countdown. Chris, we are at number 3. What came in at number 3? The third most read article on MassDevice this week.
Number 3, Boston Sci got an FDA nod for its next gen Watchman, and this is
awesome.
Very awesome. And this is about it's a left atrial appendage closure device, and this is about reducing the risk of stroke and reducing the need, trying to get rid of some of the bleeding danger associated with blood thinners. So, I mean, the original Watchman, came out a few years ago, and now Boston Sci has its next gen device, and I think it's just kind of like another example of, like, even as we have so much attention on the pandemic, I mean, device companies are getting approvals for some new some innovative stuff, even amid the pandemic. So it was good news there. Number 2 was that Abbott got an approval to for its patient controller for its neuromodulation devices. These are like implantable pacemaker like devices that you might be using to treat chronic pain or movement disorders. The controller for it can now be a smartphone app. You can there's an app for your controlling your neuromod device.
That's awesome.
FDA approved.
I keep saying that's awesome, but it is great, and it's also timely. Yeah. We had our Device Talks Tuesday on Tuesday, sponsored by S3 Connected Health, about the importance of connected medtech, and companies big and small need to have plans in place, and Abbott has really been a leader in this space. So I'm sure. I hope I never require one of these implants, but it would be assuring to have some level of monitoring control right on my available to me through an app on my phone. So
and they really said this would boost management of the conditions as well remotely, which, I mean, that's just really important right now.
Absolutely.
Anything that keeps you from having to go into a healthcare facility right now is a good thing amid this pandemic.
So, and just managing your own pain. I mean, pain is just, it's not a disease that we talk about, but it's certainly a condition that is life-changing. So great
Absolutely.
work by the folks at Abbott. All right, we're going to get into number 1 after this visit with, as I mentioned up top, we spoke with Daveen Chopra, or I got to speak with Daveen Chopra. He is from Edwards, and we talked a bit about their recent approval of Konekt Resilia, but also just about other innovations that Edwards is pursuing in the heart surgery space. So let's listen. Well, Daveen Chopra, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Daveen, I'm eager to learn about your innovation in the surgery space. We talked offline about how much attention is given to minimally invasive technologies, but there are advances being made in so-called traditional surgeries as well, and this is one of them. So before we get into that larger conversation, let's talk about the news. What has been approved, and how is it an improvement over existing technologies?
We obviously just recently got approval for a product called the Konekt Resilia aortic valve conduits. We just received FDA approval for this device. And this device is a ready-to-use device for use in these complex bental procedures. And what people had to previously do for these complex bental procedures, where you have to not only replace an aortic valve, but some of the aorta above it, is that we've created a single product that cardiac surgeons to use to put into a patient, where before they might have had to take several different products off the shelf on the back bench, kind of sew them together themselves, and kind of almost, let's say, call it jerry-rig kind of a solution for these patients. And what we did is we created a solution that they can just streamline and efficiently use to treat these complex patients.
And this assembly was done in the operating room with the patient open?
Yeah, so quite exactly. So this is traditionally an open surgery, a major open surgery, could last maybe 5 hours or so. and they would take different products that were not really fully designed or ever put together, and they'd kind of assemble themselves or sew them together, often on the back bench, and then they would put that inside the patient. So we're taking a cardiac surgeon who had to focus on putting together the medical device and getting him to hopefully now just focus on treating the patient.
What was preventing them from assembling it prior to the operation? Is it, do they have to assess the damage and see what needs to be fixed and check sizes and all that?
Yeah, I mean, a part of it's definitely that, where you can't decide which valve to use until you've opened up the patient and you've actually sized the patient. So that's an important characteristic where you can't pre-do this before the case. And additionally, if you look at traditionally most aortic valves, they're stored in a solution called glutaraldehyde. So they're stored wet, and they have to stay wet until you literally put it out and just put it into the patient. We recently came out with this new tissue called Resilia. It's our next generation, we believe, more durable tissue. But a key feature of this tissue is that it's dry, so you don't have to store it wet. So now that enables us to pre-assemble this valve with a dry surgical graft before it ever gets to a hospital versus having to do it real time at the operation.
So the approval, as I've read on the press release, is for the Konekt Resilia aortic valved conduit. Is that the entire device, or is that sort of the tool used to deliver the valve itself?
That is the device name. So it is both in a specially designed aortic valve, made with certain features for this, along with a surgical graft already pre-connected to it. So the physician's job is to take out the old aortic valve and aorta and put in this new pre-assembled device.
How does the physician, how do you account for the size issues before that the surgeon had to deal with when assembling the valve?
So now what you do is we have a variety of sizes now created. So this graft is made with all our valve sizes. So what a physician can do is, as they do the procedure, they real-time size the patient, and then they grab the right size of the pre-assembled device. So we have, a handful of different sizes that can be pulled off the shelf and then used real-time.
How does this affect the surgery time? You mentioned it could have been 5 hours or more before previously. What are we looking at now?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely streamlines and makes it more efficient. It's hard to put an exact number on it, but I think about it a little bit this way. Versus a surgeon having to make their own device. It's like an aortic valve. We don't give them the leaflets and give them a frame and say, sew it together. They've already got it done themselves. Yeah, surgeons have the skills and the ability to do so, but this just streamlines and makes the whole case more efficiently. So that 5-hour case obviously will have some kind of reduction in time, and it's hard to be precise as every case is a little bit different, but it really then makes them the confidence that the case will just go more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, we're so accustomed now in medtech to talk about value, and we've saved time, and you can fit, 6 surgeries into a day instead of 4 and all that. How are you positioning this? What is your sales pitch to the hospitals and physicians? I mean, it would seem to sell itself, but there's a lot of questions being asked these days.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think really what we see is that physicians see this unmet need. We're saying, okay, I've got a really complex procedure. I've got to do a million things to put it together. Anything I can do to reduce the number of steps and use things designed for this patient is ultimately going to make this patient have a better result and going to make it a little bit more efficient and a little bit of an easier procedure. So from a physician standpoint, it ends up being in almost a no-brainer, because they're going into something that, the cardiac surgery, a really complex case. They're a little bit younger patients. These are long cases. And you think about anything they can do to make that case easier, they jump on. And they see the value, physicians especially see this value of saying, hey, if I can do this much more efficiently, I'm going to do it. And so that's really what drives the physician's interest and usage on this product so far.
And what does the sales effort look like? I guess this is where I start thinking about COVID and how salespeople are having a difficult time getting in the hospitals. But this is obviously, is this something that, how is this sold? How does your sales team engage with the hospitals and the physicians?
Of course. So we have a direct sales team here. Let's just use the U.S. where this product is real. We have a direct sales team in the U.S. where we, especially for this particular product, it's these complex surgeries are generally more consolidated in centers of excellence. So there's, it's kind of a little bit more of that 80-20 rule on the number of centers. And there's probably, a little bit under 100 key centers in the US that really do a lot of these types of procedures. Our sales channel is very directly works with both the physician, the administrator to be able to use this product. They're there to, before that first case, to train the surgeon how to use it. And then after they've been there for maybe 1 or 2 or 3 cases over different days, we have the product stocked on the shelf where the physicians can then kind of use it on their own. But our job is really the initial training. So obviously with COVID, the timing of this is in a way where we're in a different situation than we were in, let's call it April or May, where surgeries overall were at a much lower level, and now surgeries are happening. So obviously we take all the precautions, but our reps are critical to being a part of those first procedures, and they're in the operating room with the physicians.
And I imagine there's no change or necessary change to reimbursement.
Yeah, so these procedures are under broad list page. A lot of these patients are Medicare, and some of them are obviously private payers that fall under kind of these DRGs for cardiovascular surgery that would hit all different types of valvular surgery, including the way these were traditionally done or with this procedure. So it is covered under the current kind of reimbursement scheme, which is helpful for hospitals to quickly have to adopt it, to be able to quickly adopt it. They're not waiting for a whole new coding or something like that. It falls in very well with the system of reimbursement already in place. And generally, cardiac surgery overall for a hospital is actually a good procedure for a hospital, despite the long length of stays of cardiac surgery versus other technologies, et cetera. Overall, cardiac surgery is actually a very positive financial area or line for a hospital.
And as I mentioned at the top, it's amazing. I'm just realizing how little I talk about cardiac surgery these days. It seems like so much of my time is focused on connected health or something else. What sort of innovation is happening at Edwards in this space, and what sort of advances do we see coming the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, if you take back and maybe start with the broad sense of things, right? We know there's a lot of amazing new transcatheter technologies out there, but even now and for many years in the future, there are actually a lot of cardiac surgery segments that still exist. There's still a big need for cardiac surgeons. Cardiac surgery as a specialty is actually growing in number in the US because so much surgery is needed. But what's happening is that those surgeries are actually becoming more and more complex, because as easier surgeries, maybe transcatheter technology can take care of easier surgeries. What's left is the harder surgeries, the more complex surgeries, which actually makes the need for great cardiac surgeons even higher. So as we look at our portfolio, ultimately at the highest level, we're always saying, hey, how do we look for unmet needs in cardiac surgery in segments that we think are going to keep growing, because we know there are a lot of segments that are going to always be surgery for many, many years in the future. And how do we create amazing new innovations for those people? And so what that comes down to is, a lot of the core of our business has been in valvular surgery, where we have recently come out with new generations of surgical valves that we think will last a lot longer because of these new Resilia tissue. And they're also more able to be have a transcatheter valve put into them in the future. So it's lined up. So you get, if you have to have 2 or 3 procedures in your lifetime, you have your surgery, then you can further on in the future line up a transcatheter valve into it. Mm-hmm. We're also, and so that's kind of a bulk of a lot of our inventions for both the surgical valve space as well as these complex spaces like Konect. We're also working in the mitral valve repair section, and mitral valve repair is an art form of repairing someone's mitral valve for mitral regurgitation, where we've been recently making a lot of investments in new beating heart technology. So how do you help do cardiac surgery to treat the patient without having to stop the heart, which is great for patients in kind of these low risk situations in a minimally invasive way. So we have a technology called Harpoon that we recently got CE mark for and did our first cases in Europe for. So we're continuing to invest in trying to not only advance our technologies today, but also transform cardiac surgery for the future.
And just tell me a little bit more about Harpoon. What will that be? What is that able to do?
Yeah, so Harpoon is treating mitral valve repair and a disease called degenerative mitral regurgitation. Mm-hmm. And for this way today, traditionally, surgeons, often through an open surgical approach, put an annuloplasty ring in, and it's kind of like an art where there are different methodologies and different techniques to kind of repairing the valve. And these are usually very low-risk patients that can get a long, durable solution. However, what we're trying to do with this new beating heart technology called Harpoon is enable physicians to not only not stop the heart, so keep the heart moving, which is better for patients, but through a more minimally invasive approach, essentially do a mitral valve repair without having to fully open the chest, without stopping the heart, but also targeting that same long durability in a more safe procedure. And so this is a technology that we just recently got CE marked for, and we announced not that long ago that we got approval in the U.S. to start our U.S. IDE study, and it's a very exciting technology for us for mitral valve repair.
Oh, and how large will that study be, and how many patients? When will you begin?
Yeah, we're still finalizing the numbers, et cetera, with the FDA, but we expect to enroll patients starting in the second half of this calendar year. So it's a full, IDE study that'll take a little bit to enroll, as well as the appropriate 1-year follow-up time for these patients. It's a super exciting technology.
I've only mentioned COVID once in this conversation, but I'll just ask just the final question. How have things changed under COVID? I mean, starting a clinical trial like this one, I imagine that must complicate things as well, perhaps, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. How are things impacting you?
Well, of course, I'll hit from two different angles. First, on maybe the clinical trial aspect. You said, obviously, different hospitals are in different situations now. In this trial is a U.S., Europe, Canada trial. So all in different situations. Some hospitals are in a good situation to go through the normal IRB approvals and start a trial, and some hospitals need a little bit more time, and things are going to take a little bit longer. So there is variation now in the startup of hospitals, which is occurring because of COVID. But I think overall, we saw initially in the space of cardiac surgery, obviously as COVID hits, cardiac surgery slowed down drastically. Still, the most emergent cases always were occurring, so it didn't stop, but it slowed down drastically. But what we saw, I think, through the last couple of months is that generally hospitals are able to balance treating COVID patients as well as doing cardiac surgery, because they not only need it for the patient, because it's so important for patients to not delay cardiac surgery because it leads to high mortality. So they're able to balance the two. So we've seen cardiac surgery do a pretty good comeback in the last month or two. And then there's always going to be localized hotspots that obviously kind of temper down things. But we see hospitals, physicians, and patients really prioritizing treating their deadly disease.
Excellent. Great. Well, congratulations on the approval, and thank you for the update on what Edwards is working on.
No, I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks so much. I appreciate everything.
All right. Great visit by Daveen Chopra. Thanks for joining us, Daveen. Now, here we are, the big moment. I think I need to get a drum roll sound effect for next week. But let's...
Should I do it on the table?
There you go.
All right.
The most read article on MassDevice of the week is?
Biggest story is that the U.S. and Canada want another 177 million needles and syringes from BD. So in total at this point, the U.S., Canada, UK have SBD for 330 million needles and syringes, because you just don't need a COVID-19 vaccine. You need the stuff to actually deliver to people. So
that's a great point.
Yeah, man.
I'm surprised by the needles and syringes, because we talk so much about connected health and all this innovative technology. But yeah, let's keep it real. This is the most important tech we have.
Sometimes you just need a good old-fashioned syringe to hopefully give millions of people a vaccine that will, get our lives a lot more back to normal. So
all right,
here's the hoping we can use one of those syringes, by the end of the year with something that actually works.
Absolutely. Great. Well, this has been fun. I think we'll continue to do this. It's nice to sort of give a week in review and to give companies their due for creating the news that people want to read. So, Chris, thanks for compiling this list. It is available on MassDevice.com, and we'll have a link available on the podcast website as well. So, finally, here's where we say goodbye. Chris, how can folks find you on LinkedIn and Twitter?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Newmarker, just like a Newmarker.
Excellent. We love to connect. I am also on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Twitter @MedTechTom. So thanks everyone for joining us on this week's podcast. Please do us a few favors. Number one, subscribe. That would help us a lot. Number two, leave some comments and rankings about the podcast. That also helps others find the podcast. I think most importantly, tell your friends and colleagues about the podcast if you're enjoying it, and share it on social media. And if you do that, please use the previously mentioned tags. Connect to Chris and myself. We'd love to be part of those conversations. So thanks everyone for joining us on this week's Device Talks Weekly. Don't forget, We will have our Device Talks Tuesday discussion sponsored by Finnegan. If you are a startup company with disruptive technology or a company that is worried about being disrupted, go to DeviceTalks.com. Register for the Device Talks Tuesday seminar. It's free. It'll be a great conversation. Starts at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. That's it, folks. Thanks again for joining us on this week's Device Talks Weekly Podcast.
Stay safe and healthy. I got the power.